The wind howled through the Ural mountains like a voice crying from another world, deep, lonely, and constant. Snow whispered across the frozen ground, sweeping in wide arcs over jagged rocks and half-buried pine trees. In the heart of winter, the landscape seemed untouched by time, a white canvas stretched endlessly under a cold, starlit sky. There were no signs of life, no footsteps, no fires, only silence broken by the occasional groan of the wind shifting the snow. It was February 1959 when 9 experienced hikers, students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnical Institute ventured into this wilderness. Their goal was to reach Otorten, a remote peak whose name in the native Mansi tongue ominously translates to "don't go there." Yet go they did, armed with skis, supplies, and journals filled with hopeful plans. They were young, intelligent, full of promise, and deeply connected by friendship and a shared love for exploration. When they left, the world below was bustling with life. Laughing students, busy train stations, the hum of human routine. But in these mountains, that warmth felt a world away. As the last photograph taken by the group showed them smiling beneath a banner reading, "Let's reach the summit." And no one could have imagined that within days, their bodies would be found scattered and broken across the snow. And no one could have predicted the chilling mystery that would shroud their fate forever. The year was 1959. In the Soviet Union, paranoia and secrecy often lingered behind closed doors, but among the country's youth, a different kind of spirit stirred, one of ambition, resilience, and boundless curiosity. Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute, embodied this spirit. Meticulous, confident, and respected by his peers, Igor was the leader of an elite hiking group composed of 9 members, each one seasoned, prepared, and certified for the grueling Grade 3 trek they planned to undertake. Their journey would take them deep into the northern Ural Mountains, to the frozen wilderness of Sverdlovsk Oblast. The group's goal, reach Mount Otorten, a remote peak not far from the chillingly named Kholat Syakhl, Mountain of the Dead. The name wasn't taken seriously at first. After all, many native Mansi place names were dramatic. But among the elders of the tribe, the mountain held a quiet reverence and a deep, uneasy fear. On January 23rd, the group departed by train from Sverdlovsk, a city cloaked in ice and heavy with winter air. Spirits were high. Photographs from that day show smiling faces, arms slung around each other, and handwritten notes filled with jokes and anticipation. The group included Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Rustem Slobodin, Yuri Doroshenko, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Yuri Yudin. Yuri Yudin was the only one who would survive, not by choice, but by cruel twist. Stricken with joint pain and illness, he turned back early in the expedition. As he waved goodbye to the others, unaware it would be for the last time, He later said he felt something strange, a tug in his chest, a heaviness that had nothing to do with sickness. He thought it was sadness at missing the climb. In hindsight, he wasn't so sure. The group continued by truck, then by foot, documenting their journey with meticulous care. They took photographs, wrote in journals, and kept a group diary meant to be both a personal record and a souvenir of the expedition. Each day brought deeper snow, steeper climbs, and colder winds. But they remained strong. They sang songs, cooked meals together, and braved the bitter temperatures with determination. On January 31st, they reached the edge of the highland area, storing extra supplies in a forested cache to lighten their packs for the ascent. The next day, they began the climb toward Otorten, but bad weather struck. Blizzards rolled in like walls of white, blinding and disorienting. They lost their sense of direction and veered westward toward Kholat Syakhl. Eventually, they pitched a tent on a slope of the mountain, not the most ideal location, but time was slipping away and night was falling fast. In their last diary entries, the group wrote with humor and optimism. Igor noted the challenges they faced, but none seemed overly concerned. Lyudmila cracked jokes about the cold, and Zenaida scribbled short poems. They cooked a meal, laughed, a little, and settled into their tent. It was February 1st, the last night they would ever spend alive. Then, silence. Days passed. When their expected return date came and went with no word, concern began to grow. Families waited anxiously. Friends held on to hope. Eventually, a search party was assembled. First volunteers, then military and police. Helicopters combed the skies, rescue teams pushed through deep snow, and native Mansi trackers joined the search. On February 26th, they found the tent. It was half collapsed and partially buried in snow, but what disturbed rescuers most was that it had been slashed open from the inside. Shoes, coats, and supplies were left behind, untouched. Footprints, some barefoot, led away from the tent, into the snow-covered forest. Something had caused them to flee in the dead of night, into freezing temperatures of nearly 30 degrees C, without proper clothing. But what? As rescuers followed the prints down the slope, they discovered the first two bodies near a cedar tree. Doroshenko and Krivonishenko, dressed only in their underwear, barefoot, huddled near the remains of a fire. Broken branches above suggested someone had tried to climb the tree, possibly in a desperate attempt to look back toward the tent. 3 more bodies were found between the tree and the tent. Dyatlov, Slobodin, and Kolmogorova. Their positions suggested they had been trying to return, crawling through the snow, dying one by one as they succumbed to the cold. But the horror deepened 2 months later, when the remaining 4 hikers were discovered in a ravine further into the forest, buried under snow. These bodies told a darker story. Massive internal injuries, crushed ribs, fractured skulls, and yet no external wounds, One woman was missing her tongue, another had missing eyes. The injuries were described as resembling the impact of a car crash. And the radiation found on some of their clothes only deepened the mystery. The official explanation: a compelling natural force. But behind that sterile phrase, whispers began to spread. Whispers of military testing, of secret weapons, of supernatural events. Some spoke of strange lights in the sky on the night of the incident. Others believed the mountain itself had a presence, something ancient and angry that did not welcome outsiders. Ural, the lone survivor, spent his life searching for answers. He visited the site many times, haunted by what had happened to his friends. "If I had a chance to ask God one question," he once said, "it would be, what really happened that night on Kholat Syakhl?" The truth remained buried in snow, silence, and state secrecy. But one thing was certain. Whatever happened on that mountain, it was swift, terrifying, and left 9 souls forever frozen in time. The wind still blows across Kholat Syakhl. But in February of 1959, it carried with it something more than cold. It carried echoes, faint and broken, of something that happened in the darkness, something no one could explain. In the weeks following the discovery of the hikers' bodies, the Dyatlov Pass incident became more than just a tragic accident. It became a riddle that unnerved even the most seasoned investigators. The pieces didn't add up, not in the way that ordinary tragedies often do. This felt off, not just in the details, but in the atmosphere surrounding the case. It was as if the truth hovered just outside reach, like a fog that thickens the closer you step toward it. Investigators cataloged the strange, scattered belongings left behind. Inside the tent, warm clothes, maps, compasses, food supplies, and diaries. All left as if the hikers had expected to return, except the tent had been torn from the inside, not opened. It was a detail that haunted everyone who saw it. Something terrified them enough to make them slash their way out into the freezing night without proper clothing. But what? The footsteps in the snow told part of the story, at least at first. They appeared calm, measured, not frenzied. There was no sign of a panicked stampede, no struggle. The 9 hikers had walked in a single file, some barefoot, some in socks, heading downhill toward the woods. But as the prints grew fainter and disappeared under fresh snowfall, the trail of logic did too. At the cedar tree where the first 2 bodies were found, rescuers noticed something peculiar. The bark had been shredded several meters up and branches were broken. Someone had climbed it in a frenzy. Was it to escape something? Or to see something? And then came the bodies in. The ravine, Dubinina, Thibaut Brignol, Kolevatov, and Zolotaryov. They were buried beneath 4 meters of snow. Unlike the others, they were dressed more warmly, as though they'd taken clothes from the dead in a desperate attempt to survive. But it Wasn't the clothing that horrified investigators? It was the injuries. Lyudmila Dubinina had multiple broken ribs, a missing tongue, and was missing her eyes. Thibaut Brignol had a crushed skull. Zolotaryov's chest was caved in with a force that pathologists said could only be compared to a car crash. And yet, no external wounds, no bruising. As if the pressure had come from within. No animal tracks were found near the site, ruling out scavengers. No signs of a struggle, no blood. And the way the bodies had been arranged, neatly, almost reverently, suggested something or someone had deliberately placed them there. Speculation grew. Some whispered about katabatic winds, sudden downward gusts that could cause panic. But these were rare in that region. Others suggested infrasound, a low-frequency vibration created by wind flowing over the mountains that could trigger fear, nausea, and hallucinations. But could sound alone drive 9 experienced hikers to flee into a deadly snowstorm? There were whispers about avalanches, but the angle of the slope, only about 23 degrees, made this unlikely. Moreover, the tent was still partially standing, and the footprint trail was undisturbed. If an avalanche had swept down, surely it would have buried more than just 4. And then came the rumors that couldn't be ignored. Military tests. Locals recalled strange orange orbs lighting up the sky the night of the incident. Silent, slow-moving, unnatural. Some believed the hikers had witnessed something they shouldn't have. Perhaps a parachute mine test or a secret weapon deployment. The radiation found on Dubinina's clothing added weight to this theory. But there were no blast marks, no scorched earth, no metallic debris, nothing left behind to prove it. Even more unsettling were the pages missing from their journals, small details, entries that seemed abruptly cut short or torn out. Why? Had someone edited the story they left behind? Yuri Yudin, the survivor who had turned back early, reviewed the recovered belongings in a state of growing unease. Among the items found were objects he didn't recognize, military-style gear that no one in the group had packed, a strange cloth, a pair of skis with no match, a torn document half-written in code. He began to suspect that something had happened on that mountain beyond nature. He wasn't alone. When the files were finally made public decades later, large portions were redacted. Witnesses were told to stay quiet. Mansi people were questioned but quickly cleared. Still, rumors spread that some of them spoke of ancient spirits in the mountains, beings that lived in the snow. Watchers. They spoke of the Kholat, the silent ones, whose domain was the wind and the ice. To the Mansi, Kholat Syakhl wasn't just a mountain. It was a boundary. A place where the veil between the living and something else was thin. Those who crossed it did so at their own peril. One detail that still sends chills. On a small camera belonging to Zolotaryov, a photo was found, blurry, grainy, taken in darkness. It showed what appeared to be a faint light in the woods. A round, glowing orb. It was never explained. Even stranger, one of the hikers had written in their journal shortly before the incident, "Now we know snowmen exist." A joke, perhaps, or not. Years passed. The case was officially closed, the files stamped and shelved. But for those who studied the Dyatlov Pass incident, the questions only deepened. Theories multiplied. Was it a government cover-up? A weather phenomenon? An ancient curse? Or something beyond human comprehension? In 2019, the Russian government reopened the case, only to close it again shortly after, citing natural causes. Few believed it. Not after 60 years of half-truths and inconsistencies. Not with so many threads still left hanging. To this day, Dyatlov Pass remains a place of silence. Visitors report an oppressive atmosphere. Electronics fail. Animals stay away. And sometimes at night, hikers report hearing faint screams carried by the wind, echoes of that night when 9 souls stepped from their tent into something that should not have been there. Some believe the truth lies beneath the snow, buried, too deep to ever be recovered. But others, they think it never left. Night fell like a curtain over the pass, wrapping the frozen landscape in black silence. But it was not just the dark that swallowed them. It was something far older, something watching. Igor Dyatlov had awoken first. He didn't know why. No sound, no shaking of the earth, just a weight. A presence pressing against the tent fabric like a hand from the outside, not touching, but close enough to feel. The others stirred seconds later. Zenaida, Rustem, Lyudmila. Even Semyon, the war veteran, jolted upright as though responding to an invisible command. And then it came. A low, humming vibration, felt more than heard. Like the air itself had begun to resonate, warping around them. Their breath fogged unnaturally in the cold, forming shapes that danced and twisted in the still air. The tent walls pulsed, ever so slightly, distorting inward. The light from their lantern flickered, but there was no wind, no storm, just vibration. Then came the pressure, a crushing, invisible weight that settled into their skulls. Thoughts clouded, eyes watered. Panic rose like bile, not from something seen, but from a knowing. Every one of them felt it. They were no longer alone. The first scream never left Igor's throat. Instead, his hand shot to his knife, not to defend, but to escape. They tore through the tent, slashed the canvas from the inside. No time for boots. No time for jackets, only motion. Bare feet sinking into snow. The night beyond the tent wasn't dark. It was glowing. Faint spheres of amber light hovered in the trees, unnatural in shape, swaying like they breathed. Not fire, not stars. Something else. Lyudmila whispered through chattering teeth. Don't look at them. Don't look. They didn't run. They walked, entranced. Drawn toward the tree line by something that reached into their minds, whispering in languages older than any human tongue. Every step forward felt both wrong and necessary. Behind them, the tent deflated slowly, forgotten, its flap rippling slightly in the stillness, as if exhaling. At the tree line, Yuri Doroshenko tried to resist. He clung to the cedar, tearing bark from its trunk in desperation. Blood smeared the branches as he climbed, eyes wide, searching the treetops like a man about to drown. Below him, Krivonishenko collapsed, face up, eyes fixed on a light above, his lips mouthing a word no one else could hear. Further into the woods, the others regrouped briefly, breathless, confused. Semyon Zolotaryov, eyes locked on a glowing orb floating just beyond reach, reached into his jacket and pulled out a crumpled photo. His family. He clutched it to his chest, murmured a prayer, and then something hit him. Not seen, not heard. A crushing force that shattered his ribs in silence. He fell without a sound. Thibaut Brignol turned to run, only to freeze mid-step, his eyes locking on something vast between the trees. His skull caved in as if struck by invisible hands. He dropped beside the stream, his final breath stolen by the snow. Dubinina screamed then, just once. Sharp, shrill, a burst of human terror. She ran, clothes torn, arms outstretched, her mouth open to cry again, but no sound came. Her tongue was gone. She hadn't bitten it. It had been taken. And still, the orbs watched. Kolovatov, alone now, crawled into the ravine. He wrapped his arms around Dubinina's body as if trying to protect her. His breath slowed, then stopped. Hours passed. The lights faded with the dawn. When the sun rose, over the pass, nothing stirred. Snowflakes fell in silence, burying the evidence, softening the scene. The tent, the bodies, the fear, it all began to disappear beneath white powder. The mountain once again became quiet, but for those who know what to look for, the signs remain. Footprints that stop abruptly, injuries no man could cause, a tree clawed by desperate hands, and a silence in the air too deep to be natural. Whatever came that night didn't need to scream. It didn't need to bleed. It didn't even need to show itself. It simply arrived and took. The snow lay deep and undisturbed for weeks before they were found. When the first rescue team arrived at the base of Kholat Syakhl, they didn't expect horror. They expected frostbite, exhaustion, maybe a tragic accident. What they found was silence so complete it weighed on their lungs. Even the wind, usually ever present in the Ural mountains, refused to blow that day. The tent was half buried in snow, its fabric slashed open from the inside. Boots still lined up near the entrance, journals frozen stiff, a camera with film undeveloped trapped in time. The footsteps, still visible, trailed off into the trees barefoot, calm, orderly, as though they were walking into something expected, and one by one they found the bodies. Some near the cedar tree, skin blackened from the cold. Others in the ravine, lying in unnatural positions as though gently placed. There were no signs of a struggle, no enemies, no weapons. Only trauma that defied explanation. Bones shattered from the inside, eyes missing, tongues vanished, and radiation on clothing where there should have been none. The rescue team didn't speak much. They did what they were sent to do. But every night by the fire, they sat a little closer, backs to trees, ears tuned to a silence they didn't understand. Some began to murmur of lights in the night, others of dreams, strange, humming dreams filled with whispers they could not repeat. Indy. The days that followed, reports were written. Terms like unknown compelling force were carefully used to cover what couldn't be understood. Files were marked, sealed, then buried beneath layers of red tape. Families were told the mountain had taken them, but some things can't be contained. Semyon's sister, years later, would say he looked peaceful when she saw his body, as if he had finally seen what he always feared. A hiker in the 1980s camped near the site and woke up screaming, claiming he had been surrounded by floating lights and laughter with no mouths. And every now and then, a photograph resurfaces, grainy, black and white, just before the last night. 9 smiles frozen in time. In one frame, barely visible in the background between trees, is a shape. Not man, not beast. Just a blur with 2 faint circles of light where eyes should be. The past remains. So does the cold, but the madness lingers. Not in screams, not in violence, just in a whisper that returns on certain nights when the wind forgets to blow. Sometimes, when the snow falls just right over the Dyatlov Pass, it covers not just the trail of footprints and the memories of 9 lost souls, but also the faint pulsing glow of something still watching beneath the ice, waiting in silence for the next soul foolish enough to listen too closely to the whispering wind. Because the mountain never forgot what it took